Will the uranium be transferred to the United States of America? Iran has booby-trapped the uranium tunnels. The entrances were collapsed and mines were placed at the site. The agreement with Iran is only the end of the first chapter and the beginning of Israel's next war. So, has the next war against Iran already begun? Trump declared very dramatically, the agreement with Iran will be signed tomorrow, and he added a warning. The American president ended his remarks with a clear message. If it does not happen, we have the ultimate alternative, and I hope that we will never need to use it again. In Iran, they're claiming a wide-scale cyber attack against 4 major banks. And now we can tell you the hidden meaning of the Iranian bombing of the Qatari gas. All the details are coming in this report. And in Iran, they're warning, only one enemy can destroy this agreement. The Iranian foreign minister claims that Iran insists on a withdrawal of all IDF forces from Lebanon. In addition, he's setting a clear condition regarding the Strait of Hormuz. And have you heard about the darkness of the United States military? I'm talking about the secret that Trump let slip, and it changes the entire picture in the Middle East. Trump still wants a deal with Iran, but in the meantime, he's bombing the road to this deal. The Qataris, they're holding on to mediation. The Gulf states in Europe, they want quiet, and Israel fears a bad agreement that will stop everything halfway. So let's begin. I'm Meir Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel and also the full truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And today is June 14th. So let's begin with a happy birthday to the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, on the 80th birthday. And we wish that God will give him many more years and wisdom to make the right decisions. Now let's begin with what's not being published behind this agreement. Because in recent weeks, Iran has accelerated the fortification of its enriched uranium stockpiles to the deliberate collapse of tunnels and the placement of mines. This move complicates both a possible American military operation and the implementation of any potential agreement with Washington. So what's really is happening with this agreement? First of all, we should not fall for every Iranian leak, because Trump says that the agreement could be signed very soon, maybe already tomorrow, but Iran has still not given its final approval. And the Revolutionary Guards, they are even mocking his unusual insistence on closing a significant deal, significantly and specifically right now. So a White House official made clear that no sanctions relief will be given before Iran meets its strict commitments. And according to the administration, the agreement requires the destruction of the nuclear materials, the dismantling of the program, the end of the tariff funding, and the preservation of freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. This is in contrast to reports in the Iranian Mahar news agency, which claimed that the American administration had already agreed to military withdrawal and to the full cancellation of sanctions on the oil sector and on the frozen funds. According to the reports, this is not a major peace agreement and not a final nuclear agreement. It is a short memorandum of understanding with a temporary framework of 60 days of ceasefires, then the opening of the Strait of Hormuz to vessels, stopping the threats against the shipping lanes and the ships, and at the same time opening negotiations to the big agreement, which is the nuclear program, the enriched uranium, and the international supervision. Trump presents this completely differently from the Obama administration agreement. He claims that no money will flow to Iran and that the United States will make sure that the enriched uranium is transferred for destruction or destroyed under supervision. And this is the central point. Trump wants an agreement because 60 days of quiet for the international oil market is not a bad thing, especially now during the World Cup and the 250th birthday of the United States of America and the president's own 80th birthday. So if the emerging agreement between the United States and Iran is indeed signed, United States President Donald Trump will be able to present it as a significant diplomatic achievement. From Washington's perspective, preventing Iranian nuclearization, delaying the military confrontation, and reducing the regional tension are worthy goals. But from Israel's perspective, the central question is not only what is written in this agreement, but what's not included in it. Israel is not a party to the agreement. It is also not committed to the American perception that the Iranian issue begins and ends with the nuclear question. From the Israeli point of view, the Iranian threat has never been made up of only one component. Together with our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, we will soon get into all the details to understand the development of events from an Israeli point of view. Because despite the optimism showed by Trump, who continues to push Prime Minister Netanyahu to be optimistic, in Jerusalem and amongst the professional ranks here, there is great skepticism. Senior officials made it clear that at this stage, this is not a signed agreement, but only a memorandum of understanding, and that the Iranians have still not committed to practical steps. While the White House hopes that the memorandum will mature into a formal signing in the coming days, Israel fears that this is another Iranian tactic to waste time and to remove the military threat from the table. Today, Iran's Banking Coordination Council announced that several of its systems were subjected to a limited cyber attack which hit 4 national financial bodies. In addition, it is now becoming clear that, according to security officials in the Middle East and in the United States, Qatar tried to reach a secret understanding with Tehran to prevent damage to the Ras Laffan gas facility in exchange for pressure on the United States. Doha firmly denies this and says that this is a complete lie. And underground, in the shadow of the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran, which could stop Israel's continued activity in Lebanon, the IDF released a video that exposed Hezbollah's plans to take over the north, plans that were found in a tunnel network founded by the terrorist organization in Tehran. So the IDF said that the rocket launch towards the forces in southern Lebanon triggered an alert in Metula, an Israeli community on the border with Lebanon. And in Lebanon, there is concern that the agreement with Iran will lead to negotiations between the government and Hezbollah. Contacts between the government in the land of the setters, Lebanon, and the terrorist organization could contribute to the establishment of a ceasefire with Israel. And in England, 4 pro-Palestinians who broke into an Elbit Israeli factory in Britain were sent to prison for a period of between 5 and 8 years after causing destruction at this factory in Bristol in 2024 and clashing with police officers. The judge noted that they took the law into their own hands because of rage over what's happening in the Gaza Strip. Hundreds of protesters near this courthouse took place. They were waving Palestinian flags and they shouted, "Free Palestine." And we will bring you all the details very soon. So I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the full truth about what's happening here in Israel and about what's happening in the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And 1 second before we continue, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. And most importantly, do not forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts to get a view through our eyes of what it's like to live in Israel under this war. So, our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, is this agreement really an American victory over Iran, or does it only move the war onto a 60-day stopwatch?
That's a great question. Is this a victory for the U.S., possibly a victory for Iran and the U.S., or are we just pushing back the timeline? Well, the answer is sadly complicated, like almost everything in this entire conflict. Let me try and break this down. The first part is the U.S. has gained a lot at the expense of the Ayatollah regime, on a military level, on a financial level, on a, let's call it a glamour level or perception of power level. The US has proven to be an adversary the Iranians do not know how to deal with, cannot comprehend with, cannot beat. At the same time, this war has exposed the shortcomings of any conventional army in fighting asymmetrical warfare, which is exactly what happened here. Even though the US beat Iran repeatedly on the battlefield, still the Iranians were able to disrupt, to harm, to slow down American progress and, of course, the passage of ships in the Strait of Hormuz. But what does this agreement actually mean? Well, it means a couple things. One, it shows us that the Iranians have sort of woken up from this discombobulation, the confusion that they've been stuck in, and are able finally to sign some kind of agreement. Possibly that means that the supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, is on his way out of hiding and able to actually make decisions, legitimately make decisions that bind and tie together the Iranian people. Now, on the symbolic side, the US has two big wins here. The big win is one, opening the Strait of Hormuz, and the second one is the enriched nuclear material. Those are the two very visible, very public, eye-facing resolutions that exist in this agreement. And if the agreement follows through, if Iran actually opens the Strait of Hormuz and hands over the enriched uranium, well, that is a very obvious win for the United States. More so, the very fact that President Trump was able to enter this war, end this war, and walk away with an agreement, assuming that happens, that is a huge deviation from the pattern of most wars in recent decades, definitely in the Middle East, and especially for the Americans. I mean, Trump has been afraid or has been critical in the past of getting stuck in forever wars. He was critical of the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, not in the war per se, but the fact that the US got stuck in a war that never resolved itself. And here we see finally something different. Domestically, the US can definitely flag this as a substantial win. Internationally, it's a substantial win for American military might in the Middle East, which is important. And two, a show of the weakness and limits of power of the Ayatollah regime. What was the piece that brought down the Ayatollahs? Is it the financial pressure? Is it the military pressure? Is it the decapitation of much of their leadership? Well, I'm not sure which one piece it is, and I don't know that anyone actually knows, but it's the combination of all these effects that is really bringing the Iranians to the table. Now look, the proof is in the pudding. We're not really there yet. There isn't a signed agreement, and even if there is a signed agreement later today, tomorrow, the next day, until we see the Iranians follow through on what they committed to, namely opening the Strait of Hormuz and releasing the enriched uranium, until that moment takes place, well, there's nothing really to talk about. But I believe, and I think we're really seeing the progress coming in this direction, I believe that we will see that happen in the coming days. Why do I say that? Because this time around, it's not just the White House that is talking about the details of the agreement. Also, official Iranian outlets are publicly speaking on behalf of the IRGC, on behalf of the Ayatollah, on behalf of the, let's call this civil service elements within the Iranian regime, talking about the fact that it's going to happen. And that's very different than what we've had so far. I feel hopeful that we'll see an agreement shortly, maybe even today, maybe tomorrow. We can expect to see an agreement. And when that happens, hear me here, this is an American win. This is a win for President Trump. It's definitely a win for Israel. And if the agreement is strong, if the agreement is followed to the letter, amazing, both for the Middle East and for the perception of American power in this region.
And Mati, if Lebanon is really entering into the understandings between the United States and Iran, does that mean that Hezbollah has turned from a local terrorist organization into a strategic card that Tehran is trying to save through Donald Trump?
There's a whole lot of nuance to this question, and I'll explain. The question is, has Iran been able to force the agreement to also include Lebanon and Hezbollah in this agreement? And if they have been successful in that, does that mean that Israel can't fight against Hezbollah? And the answer to that is yes, but also no. And I'll explain. It's a little more complicated than just a binary answer, a black or white situation. Iran has worked very, very hard to preserve their proxy, Hezbollah, a proxy they've spent billions of dollars, decades, huge amount of manpower, resources, equipment, training in building up. That's not going to change. That's not going anywhere. They want to make sure that this proxy survives. That too exists in this attempt of theirs to pull Lebanon into the agreement. But there's more nuance than that. Even if Iran is able to force some kind of ceasefire in this greater agreement that includes Iran on Lebanon and on Hezbollah specifically, that doesn't mean Israel can't fight against Hezbollah. Why? Because there's a huge question of where Hezbollah is allowed to be in this ceasefire situation. I can tell you easily that there is no scenario where Hezbollah is allowed back to the international border with Israel and the IDF allows that. That simply won't happen. Israel will simply continue fighting against Hezbollah regardless of what anyone says, because we've learned the lesson related to allowing our enemies to sit on our borders undisturbed and unchallenged. That's not happening. There's another scenario where Israel falls back to some kind of agreed on defensive line within Lebanon, a security zone somewhere on the Litani River, let's call it geographical line, maybe a different ridge of mountains. There's several different options over here, but that means that Israel does maintain a security buffer inside of Lebanon, and Hezbollah is not allowed south from a certain point. In other words, the question of will Hezbollah be allowed back to the Israeli border, that's an obvious no. Israel won't allow that, and it doesn't matter what the negotiation with Iran entails. One way or another, Israeli forces will not allow Hezbollah back to our borders. Will there be a ceasefire that includes the IDF stopping its offensive operations against Hezbollah? Yes, I believe that is quite possible, and it is very much within the realm of possibility. And when and if that happens, it will do more than just stop the war against Iran. It could possibly mean that we pause the war against Hezbollah. Now, it's a little more complicated here because Hezbollah has repeatedly violated ceasefire agreements, even though they were committed to on behalf of Iran or Hezbollah. As in someone says there'll be a ceasefire, Trump usually, and then the very next day or the very same day, Hezbollah violates the ceasefire agreement. Is that what's happening here? I don't know yet. It's too early to say, but if a ceasefire includes also Lebanon, it will likely include the IDF falling back to some kind of defensive line still within Lebanon, and then a much longer phase, staggered approach to building up the Lebanese army to push back against Hezbollah. One way or another, Hezbollah will be weakened. One way or another, Hezbollah will not be allowed to come back to the border with Israel. One way or another, the Israeli governments, both this one and any future government, will simply not allow Hezbollah to once again embed itself in the southern communities of Lebanon on Israel's border. That reality is no longer within the realm of possibility, nowhere in the near future. And that is a simple fact that Iran and Hezbollah will have to deal with. The big price that Iran and Hezbollah paid for this offensive war that they carried out against Israel, repeatedly, by the way, on behalf of Hezbollah, is that they're not getting back their villages, their strongholds, their bases, their tunnels on the Israeli border. And if anyone thinks that it's going to happen otherwise, well, just watch the events unfold, because Israel has learned the lesson. We fought hard to push back Hezbollah. We've destroyed their infrastructure in southern Lebanon. I've seen it with my own eyes in recent weeks. And we will make sure that we maintain that geographical buffer between us and the Hezbollah terrorists in southern Lebanon. Because, guys, Hezbollah is not a grassroots movement within Lebanon. They are terrorists whose goal is and will be to destroy Israel on behalf of Iran. They don't represent the Lebanese people, the Lebanese government. They're not a legitimate movement. They are foreign terrorists funded as mercenaries by the Iranian regime. That's what Hezbollah is. They're not freedom fighters. They're not the liberators of Lebanon. They are terrorists. They are an imperial proxy of the Iranians that exist on Israel's border and therefore cannot be allowed to ever return to the Israeli border. And whatever the agreement is, it's going to include a security buffer inside of Lebanon, one way or another, with one wording or another. That is simply the reality that Hezbollah and Iran will have to face. And because of that reality, because of the learning curve and the damage that Hezbollah has taken, Iran has lost a very substantial strategic asset in Hezbollah. They will never again in the foreseeable future go back to being what they were for Israel or for the Lebanese people. They've taken a beating, and Israel will make sure that they remain on their back foot, that they remain unbalanced, that they remain weakened for months and years to come.
And Mati, is Trump really sidelining Israel? Or is he using Israel as a military threat that forces Iran to sign this deal?
I think there's a fundamental question here. Is Israel the same level of friend and ally to the US that it was last week or 2 weeks ago? And I think if you examine this question from that perspective, the answer is quite clear. Yes, Israel and the United States are still allies and still cooperating. But the question is actually slightly different. The question is the US and Israel, or are they, fully aligned on every aspect of this agreement with Iran? And the answer to that is a simple no. The US and Israel have different interests. For Israel, the Iranians are a, well, not so close neighbor, but still a neighbor. They are an existential threat to the state of Israel. Their nuclear program, their proxy program, their ballistic missile programs, they're not philosophy, they're not theory for Israel. They are something that hits the houses and the homes of Israel unless we fight and weaken Iran. For the United States, there's a deep need of having a public win against Iran. That public win needs to include, you know what? It needs to include an agreement. It needs to include an opening of the Strait of Hormuz. It needs to include some kind of public PR moment where Trump or someone in his cabinet can hold up a piece of paper and say, look here, we have an agreement with Iran. That's what the US needs. Israel doesn't need an agreement. Israel needs a weakened Iran and weakened Iranian proxies. The agreement is nice, but it doesn't change our reality much. We really care about weakening and pushing back the Iranian nuclear program as much, as long, as far as possible. We've done it for decades, by the way. That's not going anywhere. And at the same time, Israel also has slightly different interests when it relates to Lebanon, to Gaza. Once again, for us, we want to make sure that these terrorist entities are as weak as humanly possible within our realm of possibility until we have to stop fighting. But look, the relationship between Israel and the United States is complicated. It's long-term. It has deep ties, financially speaking, militarily speaking, geopolitically, on every possible aspect. There's a deep relationship. And on top of that, you have the added value, the added layer of the tight-knit and very close relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu from Israel and President Trump from the United States. Do they see eye to eye on every single topic? No, they don't. Does that change the core identity of that relationship, the core nature of that relationship? It doesn't. Israel and the United States are fast friends and will remain so also for many months and years to come. And especially under Trump and his leadership, and I don't say this lightly, we've seen a steadfast friendship, a close alliance that Israel has not experienced in the past from anyone else, from the US administration or otherwise. That's why, again, this agreement is not exactly what Israel needs, but it never was going to be. There was always nuance, there was always complexity in the nature of the relationship between Israel and the United States, and of course, as it relates to the agreement with Iran. One way or another, Israel is a sovereign state that takes care of its security needs. When we need to, we fight Iran. You've seen that happen last year in Operation Midnight Hammer, Am Kelavi in Israel, where we struck against the Iranians on our own, only to be joined later on, more than a week into the campaign, by the Americans. That was last year. This year, too, Israel carried out strikes on Iran just a week ago, on Hezbollah targets every single day of recent weeks. When we need to, we know how to protect ourselves. When we need to, we know how to stand up for our security, for our needs to really protect Israel. But that doesn't negate the fact that we have a steadfast and long-term relationship with the United States, and that relationship isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
So thank you very much, Mati Shoshani. This definitely helped us better understand what we're dealing with. And to all of you, keep spreading the truth, share our content with as many people as possible, click on the subscribe button. Look for Yair Pinto, that's me, and Mati Shoshani on our social media account to see through our eyes what it's like to live here in Israel. And many Israelis are still juggling their reserve duty while trying to get back to work and handle their day-to-day lives. It's definitely very hard. It's not easy. Your body is tired, your mind is overloaded, and the pressure doesn't stop when the uniform comes off. I've been there, coming home from reserve, trying to be present for my family, catching up at work while still feeling like I'm in a survival mode. It takes strength, energy, and faith to push through. That's why I started using Vinia. It's an Israeli supplement made from red grape cells that helps improve the blood flow to your heart, brain, and muscles. For me, that meant better focus, more energy, and fewer days of that foggy, burnt-out feeling. I started using it during my reserve duty, and I'm still taking it today. I like also the coffee version in the morning, and there's also a tea version. But everything works, so try it for yourself and tell me what you think. Go to vinyatbnisrael.com. Again, that's vinyatbnisrael.com, or call 800-638-1944. Again, that's 800-638-1944. Give it a try for yourself. Now let's get back into the news, because in Iran, there are now reports of a cyber attack against 4 major banks in the country. And according to the official statements from the Banking Coordination Council, this was a limited attack with no data leak and no access to customer information. But in practice, temporary restrictions were imposed on some banking services, and security teams are still looking to restore the incident. So, is this only a technical failure in the banks, or another sign that the campaign against Iran has already moved into the next stage, a stage where money, information, energy, and nuclear material are all part of the same war? Because while the world is looking at the emerging agreement between Washington and Tehran, inside Iran, there is a quieter erosion that is taking place. You do not always see it in missiles. Sometimes you see it in an ATM that does not work, in a banking app that crashes, in a financial system that is forced to admit that 4 national institutions were hit. Even if it quickly tries to reassure the public that no information was stolen, in today's Iran, even an official calming statement sounds like an attempt to put out a fire before the public understands how much smoke is already in the room. This incident comes after days in which the agreement with Iran is being presented in Washington almost like a moment of decision. Trump says that the agreement will be signed, that the Strait of Hormuz will be opened immediately, that Iran no longer wants nuclear weapons, and that at the right time, the United States will collect the enriched nuclear material and destroy it. He presents it as a deal that builds a wall against the nuclear weapons. But in Tehran, the picture is different. They're casting doubt on the timetable. They're rejecting some of the details and warning that the agreement has still not been finalized. And that's exactly the problem, because if one side celebrates victory before the signature and the other side says that the text is still not closed, then we need to check what's really inside the document, and especially what's not inside it. The emerging agreement is not a final peace agreement. It is a temporary framework, probably for 60 days, meant to open Hormuz, ease the naval blockade on Iran, and move the hardest disputes into the next round of talks. That may calm the markets. It does not necessarily calm Israel. In Israel, the concern is simple. The agreement may lower the flames without putting out the fire. It could give Trump a diplomatic image, give Iran economic air, give the Gulf quiet for its tankers, and leave Israel facing the same 3 threats: nuclear weapons, missiles, and terror proxies. The nuclear issue is the most dangerous part, but it is not the only one, because according to the assessments, Iran holds a significant amount of uranium enriched to high levels, some of it buried deep underground facilities. In recent weeks, it was reported that Tehran accelerated the fortification of its uranium stockpiles. The entrances were collapsed, the tunnels were blocked, and mines were placed at the entrances to the storage sites. The operational meaning is very clear. Even if the United States wants to remove the materials by force, and even if it tries to do so by agreement, the mission has become slower, more dangerous, more complicated. This is not only a question of political decisions. This is a question of physical access. Where exactly is the material located? Who secures it? Who can reach it? Who verifies the quantity? And what happens if the Iranians drag out the clock? When enriched material is buried under the mountains, the tunnels, and the mines, the words, "we will collect and destroy it," sound simple only on page. On the ground, every meter can become an operation. Here enters the man who is no less worrying than the document itself, which is Ahmed Vahidi. He's the commander of the Revolutionary Guards, and according to reports, Vahidi has become one of the most influential centers of power in Tehran in recent months. He pushed for a hard line against the United States, opposed the early concessions, and stood behind the push to launch the ballistic missiles towards Israel after the strike in Dahia in Beirut. Different sources described him as the one who defeated the more moderate voices in the regime, those who wanted to be careful not to endanger the contacts with Washington. This matters because Vahidi is not just another general. He's one of the founders of the Revolutionary Guards, was involved in the establishment of the Quds Force, served as defense minister and interior minister, and is wanted in connection with the bombing of the Jewish community in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in 1994, in which 85 people were murdered. He also was involved in the years of building Hezbollah's power in Lebanon. Now, this man sits at the junction between the agreement and the missiles, Hormuz, and Lebanon. If he's pushing for Iran to rebuild its deterrence before it compromises, then every agreement enters a power struggle inside Tehran. That struggle is also felt in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump says that the strait will open to everyone immediately after this agreement. Iran says that the management of Hormuz will not return to what it was before. It is talking about the Iranian and Omani sovereignty, about payments for services, and about the need to end the foreign military presence in the region. In other words, even when it talks about opening, it's trying to preserve control. This is not semantics. Hormuz is one of the biggest pressure points on the global economy because if Iran cannot defeat the American Navy, it can still threaten the energy, the prices, the maritime insurance, the gas and the oil supply, and the nerves of the markets. It does not need to sink every ship because sometimes it's enough to make the world fear that every ship could be next. And this leads to Qatar, because according to reports about the recent war, Qatar tried at the beginning of the campaign to protect the huge gas facility at Ras Laffan, one of the most important economic assets in the world. According to security officials, Doha tried to reach a quiet understanding with Tehran. Iran would not hit the facility, and Qatar would be able to use its power in the gas market to pressure for a quick end to this war. Qatar strongly denies this, but the story itself shows how energy has become part of this front. And later, Iran attacked Qatar, and according to reports, the target was the Ras Laffan facility. This is a massive industrial complex, almost twice the size of Washington, D.C., and responsible for a central share of Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports. Qatar's energy minister warned that the time that repairing this damage could take years, and that the strike was not only against Qatar, but against the global energy security. This is what a regional war looks like when it moves out of the military fields and into the kitchens, into the power stations, and into the markets in Europe and Asia. And if you want to understand the Middle East and Israel through our eyes of what's happening here on the ground, I call on you to keep praying for the situation. I call on you to subscribe to TBN Israel on our YouTube channel so that you never miss another update of Boots on the Ground. We are here to report before the headlines, before the news reach the United States and other places. You'll see them on our channel. But in Lebanon, the agreement with Iran is already beginning to have an effect before it is even signed. Officials in Lebanon estimate that after a signature between Washington and Tehran, contacts will be opened between the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, and Hezbollah. Their idea is clear. If Iran received an agreement, maybe Lebanon can also get a more stable ceasefire with Israel. But here in Israel, this is not seen as a solution, because Israel sees it as an attempt to move Hezbollah from the status of an armed terrorist organization to the status of a political player that receives time to recover. The Iranians are demanding that ending the war in Lebanon include an Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon itself. Abbas Araghchi said explicitly that Iran will not give up on Hezbollah, that ending the war will include Lebanon, and that the other fronts as well will be included. Here in Israel, the message is the opposite. No automatic withdrawal, no giving up the freedom of action, and no situation in which an American-Iranian agreement ties the IDF's hands against the threat developing across the border. So we need to understand this gap. From Washington's point of view, an agreement can be a way to close a front. From Israel's point of view, a bad agreement can open the next war. If Hezbollah remains armed, if the organization's terrorists remain south of the Litani River, if the militias in Iraq are not dismantled, and if the Houthis continue to threaten shipping lanes in the Red Sea, then Iran has not really weakened. It has only moved to the center of gravity from the state itself to its proxies. And at the same time, Israel must also deal with the broader diplomatic front, because the emerging agreement once again highlights the gap between the American interest and the Israeli interests. Washington wants to reduce the tension, the opening of Hormuz, stability in the energy prices, and an agreement that it can present as an achievement. Israel needs to make sure that the threat is not only delayed, but truly reduced. 60 days of quiet are not enough. Israel needs to know what happens on day 61. This is where the next war begins, and it does not necessarily begin with a missile. It begins with a weak inspection mechanism. It begins with frozen funds released too quickly. It begins with uranium that no one has seen with their own eyes. It begins with missiles defined as a matter for the next stage. It begins with Hezbollah receiving time to reorganize its ranks. This is not yesterday's war, but it has been built out of today's decisions. That's why Israel must act on several tracks at the same time. With the United States, it must demand clear inspection mechanisms, sure timetables, and sanctions that return automatically with every violation. With Europe, it must explain that the Iranian threat is not only an Israeli one. It passes through Hormuz, through Qatari gas, through UAVs in the Red Sea, and through terror activity even on Western soil. With the moderate Arab states, Israel must build a shared interest, not allowing Iran to once again become the power that dictates the price of the entire region. The international arena is already beginning to understand part of the price. In Britain, 4 activists from Palestinian Action were sent to lengthy prison sentences after a violent break-in at the Elbit Israeli factory near Bristol. They caused heavy damage, attacked a police officer, and at the court, they determined that a terrorist connection to the offenses was established. So this is not a classic Middle Eastern event, but it is part of the same wider campaign. Israeli defense industries, anti-Israel campaigns, political violence, and an attempt to harm Israel's defensive capabilities even beyond its borders. In the end, the agreement with Iran can be an important diplomatic moment, but it is not the end of the story. Because if it deals only with the headline of the nuclear issue and not with the entire Iranian power system, it will become a ceasefire with an hourglass. Iran will try to present survival as victory. Trump will try to present a signature as a decision. Israel will have to check on the ground whether anything has truly changed. The war with Iran does not end on the day that a document is signed. It only shifts into the question of who uses the time that it received better. Will the next 60 days stop the axis of evil or give it the oxygen that it needs for the next round? Let me know what you think about these questions in the comments. I'm curious to hear. Also, please let me know where you're watching from and what do you think it's important to stand with Israel now. So thank you so much for watching us. Thank you for standing with Israel. Keep praying for the situation. Pray for wisdom to our leaders, for our soldiers. Pray for the Gulf states to reach an agreement that is peaceful with Israel and is against terrorism. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. We'll see you again tomorrow.